Sebastian Cole didn't do small town beaches. He did boardrooms, billion-dollar mergers, and penthouse views of city skylines until the day he slammed the brakes on his life and rented a beach house 2 hours outside of Los Angeles, needing to breathe air that didn't come from a skyscraper vent. The house was modern, glass-fronted, and too quiet. That annoyed him more than he expected. But what really threw him off was the woman across the street. She wasn't flashy, no makeup, wore cut-off shorts and a tank top on most days, and he couldn't stop staring. Every morning she came out with a coffee mug, barefoot on her porch. She stretched like she had no idea someone was watching from across the street, and she smiled at everyone who passed by except him. Sebastian didn't know why that bothered him. He told himself he didn't care, but on the 5th day of watching her from his balcony, he closed his laptop mid-call and walked outside. The sun hit him like a slap. She was watering her plants, humming something under her breath. Her dark blonde hair was tied in a loose braid, strands sticking to her cheek from the heat. "Hey," he said. She looked up, surprised. "Hi." He waited for her to say something more. She didn't. "I just moved in across the street." "I noticed," she said. He raised an eyebrow. And she tilted her head. "And you stare a lot." Sebastian let out a laugh, short and surprised. "I wasn't staring, I was observing." That's what all the staring people say. He was thrown. People didn't talk to him like this, not in meetings, not in boardrooms, not even in bed. "I'm Sebastian," he said, offering a hand. She looked at it, then back at him. Ellery Grant." He lowered his hand. "You live here?" he asked. "Yeah," she said simply. "That's my house. I grew up in it." "Nice neighborhood." She gave a small shrug. "It's quiet." "Most people like that." Sebastian ran a hand down his jaw. "I was hoping it would be." They stood in silence. Then she smiled again, but this time it wasn't the polite one she gave passing dog walkers. It was real, soft. "You don't look like you belong here," she said. He smiled back. "Probably don't." She turned back to her plants like the conversation was over. He stood there another second, then walked back to his side of the street. The next morning she waved, he waved back. By the end of the week, he learned she was a painter. She worked from home, sometimes on the porch. Sometimes in the back studio he only caught glimpses of through her windows. She wasn't nosy, didn't ask questions, didn't seem interested in who he was or what he did, which made him want to tell her, but he didn't. Instead, he offered to carry her groceries when she came back from the market. She declined. He brought over coffee the next day. She accepted. "Why are you really here?" she asked as they sat on her porch in the early evening sipping the drinks. He looked at her. "What makes you think it's not just a vacation? You don't relax well." He laughed under his breath. "I took a leave," she blinked. "Like, from work?" "Yeah." She looked at him again, longer this time. "You're not just some burnt-out tech guy, are you?" Sebastian hesitated. "No." "What do you do?" "I run a company." She raised an eyebrow. "What kind of company?" "Investment group." She nodded slowly. "So, money. Lots of it." She didn't react, didn't lean in, didn't ask how much, just sipped her iced latte and looked out toward the beach. He stared at her profile. "You're not impressed." "I'm tired of people who are their jobs." Sebastian tilted his head. "And what are you, Ellery?" She looked at him, and for a second something shifted in her expression. "Trying not to lose myself in the noise." That stayed with him. Long after she went inside, long after he returned to his side of the street. By the second week, he found excuses to be outside more, mowing the lawn he didn't care about, washing a car he barely drove. She noticed. "You're really bad at pretending you're not interested," she said casually one afternoon. He looked up from where he'd been wiping down his vintage black convertible. "Interested in what?" She grinned. "Not me, apparently." He walked across the street. "Dinner," he said. She blinked. "What? Let me take you to dinner." "I don't go on dates with strangers." He lifted an eyebrow. "We've had coffee 4 times. I carried your groceries yesterday. You carried 1 bag. It was heavy." She laughed. "I'm not a stranger anymore," he said. "Just a guy who rented the house across from yours." She looked at him, quiet for a second. "Fine, but only if I pick the place." She picked a seafood shack on the sand where the tables were scratched and the waitress knew her by name. He let her order for both of them. You're full of surprises, he said. Most people just don't pay attention. He did. He watched everything she did, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed, the way she bit her bottom lip when she was deep in thought, the way she looked out at the ocean like it held something she missed. I want to see your studio, he said. She raised an eyebrow. That's usually third date material, he grinned. Then let's call this the second and a half. She didn't answer, just paid the bill before he could. When they got back, she didn't invite him in, but the next morning she was on his porch holding 2 coffees. You're hard to ignore, she said. He took the cup from her hand. So are you. They stood there, quiet for a moment, the ocean crashing in the distance. I don't know what this is, she said honestly. But I'm not looking for something fake. Neither am I. You're leaving eventually, he stared at her. What if I'm not sure I want to? She looked at him then, really looked, and he saw at the flicker of something she was trying not to feel. Something wild and real and unexpected. I paint what I feel, she said quietly. Then paint me in, he said, and for the first time since he'd moved in, he saw Ellery blush. He liked it more than he should have. The first time Ellery let him inside her studio, Sebastian didn't know where to look first. It wasn't what he expected. The walls were raw wood, the floor splattered with decades of color. Natural light flooded through high windows, and the air smelled faintly of turpentine and salt. There were canvases leaned against every surface, some finished, others abandoned mid-thought. None of them were landscapes or still life. They were messy, emotional, and uncomfortably intimate. She stood near the doorway, arms crossed like she was bracing for a critique. He walked slowly, eyes scanning the room without touching anything. He stopped in front of a half-finished piece, swirls of stormy blue and sharp, red lines cutting through the chaos. This one's not like the others, he said. It's not finished. Still, he said, turning to her. It feels like something you didn't want to say out loud. She didn't answer right away. I started that the night after you showed up, she said quietly. He looked back at the canvas. The paint was still wet in places. That a good thing or a bad thing? I haven't decided yet. He stayed for less than an hour, but it felt like something shifted the moment she opened that door. When he left, she didn't walk him out. She stayed in the studio, staring at the piece he couldn't stop thinking about. The next day, a storm rolled in from the coast. The sky turned slate gray and the power flickered twice before giving up completely. Sebastian found her on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, sketchbook balanced on her knees. Do you always sit outside in the middle of a storm? Best lights when the sky's angry. He leaned against her railing. You don't mind the rain. I like when things don't behave the way they're supposed to. He watched the wind whip her braid loose. What would someone draw right now? She flipped the page and without looking up said, You, standing there, pretending you're not looking for reasons to stay longer than you planned. He crossed the porch and took the pencil from her hand, holding it up. Then draw me how you see me. She met his eyes. You couldn't handle it. Try me. She didn't draw him that night, but she did take his hand and pull him into her living room when the rain got too heavy. Candles flickered on the mantel, casting golden light across the hardwood floor. He stood at the center of the room, dripping, while she disappeared into the kitchen. When she came back, she handed him a towel and a dry t-shirt that clearly didn't belong to her. He raised an eyebrow. My brother left it here years ago. He didn't ask more. He changed in the hallway, the shirt tight across his chest, and when he came back, she was pouring tea into mismatched mugs. You don't drink wine? He asked, settling onto the couch. I don't drink anything I can't name all the ingredients in. He glanced down at the tea. Chamomile, closer to lemongrass and ginger, he sipped. You always this careful? I'm careful with things that matter. He looked at her. Do I matter? She didn't answer, just turned away and walked toward the window. My mom used to sit there during storms, she said. Said thunder was just the sky clearing its throat. He joined her, watching lightning split the horizon. Where is she now? Gone. He didn't speak. Let the silence sit between them. She died 3 years ago, Ellery said finally. Left me the house and a lot of unfinished stories. He wanted to reach for her, but she stood stiffly, not asking for comfort. "I'm sorry," she nodded once. "You ever lose someone?" He hesitated. "My father, but I didn't really know him." "What about your mother?" "She's alive, just not present." Ellery turned her head. "You talk about your life like it's someone else's." He didn't deny it. She stepped closer. "You never planned to stay here, did you?" "No, but you're still here." He looked down at her lips, then back to her eyes. "I haven't found a reason to leave yet." Her breath caught, almost imperceptibly. Then, as if the tension hadn't just thickened the air between them, she stepped past him and picked up her sketchbook. "I want to draw something," she said, flipping to a fresh page. "But I don't want you to look until I'm finished." He sat back on the couch, watching her work in quick, confident lines. After a while, she paused and said, "You don't talk like someone who's on vacation." "I'm not." "Then what are you doing here?" He leaned forward. "Trying to remember who I was before everything became about winning." She glanced up. "And are you?" He searched her face. "With you, maybe." A gust of wind rattled the windows. She turned the page toward him. It wasn't a portrait. It was a silhouette, standing at the edge of a cliff, arms open wide as waves crashed below. "That's how I see you," she said. "Trying to let go but still afraid of the fall." He stared at it, throat tight. "You got all that from a few conversations?" She shrugged. "People show more than they say." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he didn't feel like a man playing a role, he felt seen. "I want to take you somewhere," he said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "Somewhere you've never been." "Somewhere that doesn't smell like sea salt and paint thinner." She smiled, just barely. "You're not going to tell me where, are you?" "No." "And if I say no, I'll ask again tomorrow." She tilted her head. "Persistent. I have to be." "You don't make it easy." "I'm not supposed to." He stood, walked to the door. "Be ready by 4, he said. She didn't stop him. But she didn't say yes either when he left. Her sketchbook was still open on the table, and the storm had finally passed. Ellery stood on the porch steps at precisely 4 o'clock, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and uncertainty flickering across her face. Her hair was pulled up beneath a baseball cap, her expression unreadable. Sebastian stepped out of the glossy black SUV now parked in his driveway, dressed in a dark linen shirt and aviators. He opened the passenger door without a word, and she hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Still time to change your mind," he said. "I haven't even agreed yet. You're here with a bag, that's at least a soft yes." She exhaled through her nose and crossed the street. Inside, the vehicle was cool and quiet, the interior somehow smelling faintly of cedar and citrus. She glanced around at the touchscreen console, the polished leather, the sleek lines of luxury she didn't recognize but clearly cost more than her house. "Do you always drive things that look like they belong in a Bond film?" "I usually don't drive myself at all," he admitted, pulling out of the driveway. "You're getting the stripped-down version of me." She tilted her head. "This is stripped down." "I didn't even bring a driver." That earned a breath of laughter from her, but she didn't look at him. Instead, her gaze shifted out the window as they turned onto the highway, the coastline stretching wide and sun-drenched beside them. They drove in silence for nearly an hour until the ocean disappeared, and the roads narrowed into winding curves flanked by cypress trees. Eventually, they turned down a gravel path flanked by wooden fencing so weathered, it looked like it belonged in another century. "You're not taking me to some remote murder cabin, are you?" she asked, only half joking. "Almost the opposite." When the trees opened up, the car slowed in front of a sprawling vineyard estate, the kind with ivy-covered walls and wrought iron balconies. A woman in a crisp white blouse and black slacks came down the steps with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Cole," she greeted, "everything is ready." Ellery's brows lifted. "You rented a vineyard." "I own it." She turned to him. "You're not serious. I bought it last year. Thought I'd turn it into a retreat center. Haven't really touched it since." "Why bring me here?" He glanced at her as he stepped out and opened her door. "Because you said you liked when things didn't behave the way they were supposed to." They walked through rows of lemon trees and lavender hedges to a secluded patio overlooking a valley of vines. A table had been set with chilled, sparkling water, 2 glasses, and a bowl of olives she didn't touch. "You're full of surprises," she said at last. "You said that once already. Did I? Must be running out of ways to describe this." He leaned forward, arms resting on the table. "I didn't bring you here to impress you." "Then why?" "I wanted to see what you looked like in the kind of place you'd never take yourself." She looked away, fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "You think I don't belong somewhere like this?" "I think you belong anywhere you decide to stand." Her head turned toward him slowly. "You always talk like that, only when I mean it." The estate manager returned with a tray of small plates: grilled peaches, whipped feta, roasted almonds drizzled with honey. Ellery eyed the spread with quiet suspicion. "You don't have to eat it," Sebastian said. "But if you don't, I'll eat yours too, and that would be tragic." She picked up a peach slice, bit into it, and didn't speak for several seconds. "Okay," she said. "That's unfairly good." He smiled but didn't comment. "Is this how you usually spend your days? Flying people around to private estates and feeding them curated fruit?" "I don't usually spend my days with anyone." She went quiet again. "You don't talk about your past much," he said after a moment. "You don't ask." "I'm asking now." She finished chewing before answering. "I went to school in Santa Cruz. Art program. Dropped out after 2 years. My dad got sick and I came back." He waited. "He passed last winter. I stayed. Didn't feel right leaving again." "Do you want to?" "Sometimes. But then I think about what I'd leave behind. This town is all I've ever really had." He leaned back. "You ever think about doing something riskier?" She gave him a look. "You offering me a corporate job?" He shook his head. "I'm saying you could do more than paint from your porch. And you think dragging me to a vineyard I didn't know existed is going to change my entire view of the world?" "No," he said, "but maybe it'll remind you that it's bigger than you remember." She studied him, eyes narrowed slightly. "You ever think about changing yours, my world? Yeah, I mean, you've got the money, the access, you could do anything, but you're the one hiding in a beach house pretending you don't care what comes next." He didn't reply right away. "I don't know what comes next," he said finally. "But lately, I wanted to involve someone who makes me question everything I thought I wanted." She leaned back, clearly caught off guard. "You don't even know me, Sebastian." "I know enough to know I don't want to stop finding out." The sun began to dip behind the hills, casting everything in amber gold. The vineyard glowed like something from a dream she didn't know how to name. "You're dangerous," she said softly. He met her eyes. "Only if you try to forget this happened." She stood slowly, walking to the edge of the patio where the walls ended in open air and grapevines reached toward the horizon. "You brought me here because you wanted to see who I could be. Not because you wanted to change anything for yourself." He rose, stepping beside her. "I brought you here because I never knew quiet could feel like this until I met you." She turned to him, eyes searching, then without warning she kissed him. It wasn't careful, it wasn't uncertain. It was bold and sudden and tasted like everything he hadn't known he needed. When she pulled back, she pressed her forehead to his. "I don't know what we're doing." He held her there, brushing his thumb along her jaw. "Then let's not define it yet. Let's just not walk away." "No promises," she whispered. "But no goodbye either," he said. "No, not yet, not that night, not yet." Sebastian hadn't intended to stay more than 2 weeks. But it had been nearly a month since he'd first crossed the street, and somehow his return flight remained unscheduled. His assistant had called twice that morning, her tone clipped and too familiar with disappointment. He ignored both. Ellery hadn't brought up what happened at the vineyard. She hadn't kissed him again, but she hadn't pulled away either. If anything, her silence had grown more weighted, more charged. She painted longer hours. He knew because he'd caught the faint glow pouring from her studio windows well past midnight. That evening, he found her sitting on the beach, knees drawn up and jeans rolled to her calves. She didn't look over when he approached, just patted the sand beside her. You ever think about what your life would have been like if you'd taken a different first job? She asked as he sat down. I started my own company out of college. That's not what I asked. He leaned back on his palms. Then yeah, sometimes I wonder if I'd be less calculated. You are calculated, she said with no malice, only observation. I've had to be. I don't think you know how to want something without trying to own it. He looked at her sharply. She didn't flinch. You keep offering me pieces of your world like you're waiting for me to pick one, but I already have a life. You just don't know what to do with someone who doesn't need you to save them. I never thought you needed saving. Then stop acting like I'm supposed to be impressed every time you show me something expensive. He stared at the tide, the words hitting harder than he was ready to admit. I didn't bring you to the vineyard to impress you, he said, quieter this time. I know. You brought me because you wanted to see if I'd change. I wanted to see what you'd choose if the limits disappeared. She stood suddenly, brushing sand from her hands. I don't need my life erased to feel like it matters. He followed her up the path, neither speaking until they reached the road. Her porch light was already on. I'm not trying to rewrite your story, he said. I just don't know how to be part of it without feeling like I'll ruin it. She paused at the top step. Then maybe the problem isn't me. Her door closed gently behind her. The next morning, her car was gone. He waited until noon before calling the market. They hadn't seen her. By dusk, he'd walked the beach, driven the loop through town twice, even knocked on her neighbor's door. No one had answers. The third morning, her car returned. He saw it from his window and was across the street before she even stepped out. You left. I needed air. Where did you go? She closed the car door. Carmel, I stayed with a friend. He searched her face for anything that would explain the hollow ache in his chest. I wasn't running from you, she said. I just needed to be somewhere that didn't feel like standing next to a loaded question. Then let me give you an answer. She looked wary. To what? To everything I've been dancing around. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. I came here because I thought I needed to disappear. But I stayed because I found something I didn't know I was missing. You made me remember that quiet doesn't mean empty. That stillness doesn't mean stuck. You don't need me to fix anything, Ellery. But I want to stand next to you anyway. She blinked, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked like she didn't know what to say. I don't want to be your escape, she said finally, and I'm not your fresh start either. You're not, he said. You're the part that makes all the rest make sense. She swallowed hard. What happens when you go back to your life? I bring you with me. She laughed once, dry and sharp. You think I'm just going to drop everything and follow you into some high-rise fantasy? No, he said. I think we build something that doesn't require either of us to give up who we are. I think we find a way to make both lives fit. And if we can't, I'd rather fail trying with you than succeed without you. She stared at him for a long time, her breath shaky, her fingers curling at her sides like she didn't trust them to stay still. Come with me, he said. Just for a few days, we'll stay in the city. I'll show you what my world actually looks like. No private estates, no curated dinners, just me. She crossed her arms. You're really not used to people saying no to you, are you? I'm not used to wanting them to say yes this badly. She didn't answer, not then. But the next morning she was waiting on his porch at sunrise, duffel bag slung over her shoulder again. I hate planes, she muttered. He took her bag without a word and opened the passenger door. The jet was already fueled, the crew prepped. But inside it was quiet, no champagne, no fanfare, just polished wood floors and two seats facing each other. You cleaned this up for me, she said. No, he said. This is the stripped-down version of me. She sat, narrowed her eyes, and said, You already used that line. I didn't think you were listening the first time. I was. They landed in Los Angeles before noon. His driver met them at a private terminal, and for once, Sebastian didn't correct him when the man assumed Ellery was more than a guest. She said nothing as they pulled up to his penthouse. She didn't gasp at the view or ask about the art. But when she stepped onto the balcony and looked out over the city, something shifted in her expression. This is louder than I thought it would be, she said. I always thought I liked the noise. But now I know I only liked it because it kept me from having to think. She turned to face him. And what are you thinking now? That I don't want to go back to pretending this isn't real. She stepped closer. Then don't. He reached for her, and this time when she kissed him, it wasn't tentative or cautious. It was a promise. 3 weeks later, he stood on the porch across from her house again, this time holding a single key. I had the beach house extended, he said. Studio in the back, ocean view. Nothing's changed unless you want it to. She took the key, closed her fingers around it, and leaned into him. I want it to change, she whispered. That night she moved in one canvas, one sketchbook, and 2 mugs at a time, and the house didn't feel quiet anymore. Ellery stood in the center of the new studio Sebastian had built onto the beach house. The walls were tall and whitewashed, the windows angled to catch every last drop of light from the western sky. One of her larger canvases rested on the easel, half finished, brushstrokes wild and undisciplined in a way she hadn't allowed herself in years. Sebastian leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with the kind of quiet focus that had nothing to do with art and everything to do with her. I didn't ask for this, she said without turning. I know, you built it anyway. I didn't do it to win points. She finally glanced at him. Then why? Because you stop breathing when you're not creating, and I want to live in a world where you breathe easy. She set the brush down, slower than necessary. You shouldn't say things like that unless you mean them. I've never been more certain of anything. Ellery walked toward him, wiping her hands on the rag tucked into her back pocket. You're not used to permanence. You like control, movement, transitions. This, she motioned to the house, the studio, the beach beyond, this is stillness. I used to think stillness meant failure, he said. Now I think it means I finally have something worth staying for. She stopped just in front of him, close enough that he could see the faint gold of paint caught beneath her fingernails. I'm not going to follow you back to the city full time, she said. I love you, but I can't be erased in someone else's world. I'm not asking you to be. You're going to have to figure out how to balance both, she warned. This life and that one, I already am. She searched his face for signs of hesitation. There weren't any. I told my board I'm stepping down as CEO, he said, her eyes widened. You what? I'll still own the company, still have a say, but I'm not going to run it, not anymore. She stepped back, stunned. You've built your entire identity around that company. No, he corrected gently. I built a wall with it. I'm done hiding behind it. Her throat worked, but no sound came out. I don't need the power, he said. I don't need the headlines, I need this, you, a life that doesn't leave me hollow at the end of the day. Ellery blinked quickly, the edges of her eyes damp. I don't cry, she said, voice tight. Then don't, just say you believe me. I do, she whispered. I just can't believe you gave it up. I didn't give anything up, he said. I traded in noise for meaning. She laughed, a single wet sound. You're ridiculous. I'm yours. She launched forward and kissed him, fierce and certain, her fingers threading through his hair like she'd been waiting her whole life to hold him this way. When they finally pulled apart, her lips were flushed and her breath shallow. Don't ever build something for me again without telling me, she said, eyes sharp despite the softness on her face. I promise, he said. Next time I'll ask what you want before I build it. There's going to be a next time, he grinned. There better be. Later that week, they drove up the coast to scatter her father's last box of ashes. She hadn't known what to do with them for the past year, and suddenly, standing beside Sebastian on the cliff where her parents used to hike, she knew. She didn't cry. She didn't speak much. But when it was done, she took his hand and said, "Thank you for waiting until I was ready." He kissed her knuckles. "You're worth the wait." By summer's end, her work had been featured in a gallery in San Francisco, a surprise submission from a collector who'd purchased one of her early pieces. She'd nearly turned down the invitation until Sebastian said, "You don't have to leave the beach to be seen. You just have to decide you're worth looking at." She went. He stood at her side in a crisp navy suit, watching her navigate crowds of buyers and critics with that same calm confidence she wore barefoot on the porch. And when one of them offered her a chance to do a solo show in Florence, she didn't glance at Sebastian for permission. She said yes. They flew together in the fall. The apartment they rented overlooked the Arno River, and the studio in the attic had terrible heating and slanted ceilings, but Ellery painted like she was born for the light in that city. Sebastian took meetings when he wanted, turned down acquisitions without guilt, and spent entire afternoons reading beside her easel, learning to love the silence he used to avoid. One evening, as the church bells echoed across the water, she turned to him with paint on her face and said, "You look like someone who found peace." He didn't answer with words. He pulled a velvet box from his pocket and opened it. She stared at the ring, simple, elegant, a single sapphire nestled in platinum. "I don't need promises," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm not making one," he said. "I'm offering a future." She slid the ring onto her finger without ceremony, without spectacle. Then she kissed him under the cathedral light, with the whole city humming around them. They didn't rush back to the beach house. They didn't plan a wedding with flower arrangements and seating charts. Instead, they returned in the spring, barefoot in the sand, exchanging vows under a driftwood arch built by her brother and lit with lanterns her mother had collected before she passed. Only a handful of people were there: his sister, her childhood best friend, a few neighbors from the street. Ellery wore a white sundress with a paint stain on the hem. Sebastian wore no tie for the first time in his adult life. They kissed before the ceremony was technically over. And when the sun dipped low, they danced in the sand to an old record player, her head tucked beneath his chin. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this anchored," she whispered. "Maybe we never needed to be anchored," he said. "Maybe we just needed somewhere to land." Years later, the studio was full of canvases that had traveled the world and always come home. The vineyard became a weekend retreat for artists who needed air and quiet. The penthouse in the city was rarely used, but always theirs. And in every version of their life, from coastal mornings to Florentine sunsets, they found each other again and again, not because they had to, but because they chose to, every time.